In the ruthless world of academia, Sora's hard work was a fragile dream, vulnerable to the whims of the powerful. Min-jun, the cold campus king, didn't just stand in her way. He used his influence to blackmail her, a move that seemed to cement his status as her ultimate tormentor. Yet, a stolen flash drive and a secret that had been kept for a year became the unexpected twist that would unravel everything he built. But listen, because this is the story of how their bitter rivalry became the foundation for a love more powerful than any conflict they had faced. The air in the university library was always cold, a sterile comfort for those consumed by their studies. But today, for Sora, it felt suffocating, as if the silence itself were a physical weight pressing down on her lungs. This was the final stretch, the last brutal week before her senior thesis was due. 4 years of sleepless nights, 3 part-time jobs, and the quiet, gnawing anxiety of a scholarship's existence all funneled down to this single, monumental document. Her research, once so promising, had hit a dead end, a concrete wall she couldn't seem to climb. The blinking cursor on her screen was a relentless, mocking metronome, counting down the seconds of her despair. That's when he walked in, the campus king, Min-jun. He didn't just enter a room, he commanded it. A ripple of unease, or perhaps reverence, seemed to follow him. His perfectly styled black hair and expensive tailored coat were a stark contrast to the frayed sweaters and tired faces of the students around him. But it was his sneer, a subtle downturn of his lips that spoke of profound and total superiority, that truly defined him. Min-jun was a legend, not just for his brilliant strategic mind, but for the ruthless, icy ambition that drove him. His family owned one of the largest conglomerates, a chaebol, whose name was synonymous with power and soul, and it was a birthright he wore like a suit of armor, fueling his arrogant disdain for anyone who wasn't at the top of the pyramid. His motive was a simple, brutal equation: to be the best, no matter the cost, to prove his worth in a world where everyone else was a potential rival to be outmaneuvered. Sora, in every way, was his polar opposite. She was a scholar by necessity, not privilege, her only weapon her fierce, unwavering determination. And the animosity between them was a festering wound that had never healed. It had started a year ago in a packed lecture hall when she'd presented her passion project on sustainable urban development. Min-jun, from his seat in the front row, had publicly dismantled her work with surgical precision, calling her data amateurish and her conclusions naive, with a cold, condescending smirk. The memory of his mocking laughter still burned, a searing humiliation that fueled her every late-night study session. Now, as he strode past a row of silent bookshelves and took the seat directly across from her, a fresh wave of hatred surged through her veins. He didn't even spare her a glance, his attention already fixed on his sleek laptop. His presence was a provocation, a silent reminder of his dominance in a space where she was already struggling. Her heart pounded with a mix of fury and resentment, her fingers trembling as she closed her laptop, deciding to flee rather than endure his presence. She'd rather work in the chilly cafe than spend another second in his cold orbit. Just as she was about to push her chair back, a small metallic object on the floor beside his seat caught her eye. It was a flash drive, sleek and silver. Her own flash drive, with her thesis data, had a matching keychain, and in her panicked state, she'd assumed she'd dropped it. Without thinking, she bent down and picked it up. A moment later, a long shadow fell across her desk, blocking the fluorescent light. Min-jun was standing over her, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that cut through the silence. "That's mine," he said, the words a direct, unquestionable command. "Give it back. I need it." Sora's hand instinctively tightened around the small drive. She was about to hand it over, her cheeks burning with embarrassment at her mistake, when her eyes fell on her own purse. Unzipped, slightly ajar, and inside was her flash drive, the engraved letters of her name clearly visible on its side. This wasn't hers, this was his. A mischievous thought, sudden and sharp as a shard of glass, pierced the fog of her frustration. This wasn't a mistake, it was an opportunity. This was the universe offering a small, delicious moment of poetic justice. He had humiliated her, mocked her, and now a piece of his world, a fragment of his carefully constructed kingdom, was in her hand. A defiant, dangerous idea took root in her mind. This was a chance, however small, to reclaim a piece of the dignity he had stolen from her. With a swift, almost practiced motion, she tucked his flash drive deep into her pocket. She rose to her feet, her gaze meeting his for the first time. The hatred in her eyes was a challenge, a silent promise. And then she walked out, leaving him standing there alone. A small, triumphant smile played on her lips as she exited the library, the suffocating air now feeling like a breath of fresh air. She knew in that moment that she had just started a game she might not win, but for now, the first move was hers. And it felt like a victory. The small, triumphant smile Sora had worn the previous evening dissolved with the morning light. The flash drive, now a cold, metallic pebble in her pocket, felt less like a trophy and more like a ticking time bomb. The bravado of her defiance was quickly replaced by a gnawing anxiety. She had stolen from Min-jun. A bold move, perhaps, but a reckless one. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that he would not let this go. She braced herself for a public confrontation, a sarcastic remark, another searing humiliation in front of her peers. She anticipated a storm, but what she got instead was the unnerving calm before it. The anonymous email arrived while she was staring blankly at her laptop, the screen still mocking her with its blank page. There was no subject line, no sender name, just a single cryptic sentence that made her heart seize in her chest. "I have something you need. If you want it back, meet me at the old observatory tonight." Her mind immediately supplied the missing signature. Only he would be so theatrical, so casually menacing. The message wasn't a threat, it was a carefully crafted invitation. He wasn't demanding his property back, he was proposing a game. And this, more than any public outburst, was what truly rattled her. It was a silent declaration that he was a master of strategy, not just a brute of privilege. The emotion in her chest shifted, a profound and confusing transformation. The raw, hot fury of hatred began to cool, morphing into a cold, sharp blade of intrigue. What did he have? What could be so important that he would resort to this elaborate, secretive meeting? The question burrowed into her thoughts, and, despite every rational instinct screaming at her to run, she found herself undeniably drawn into his challenge. He had captured her attention, and now, against her will, she was playing by his rules. As dusk settled over the campus, she walked to the old observatory, a derelict, copper-domed building that crowned the highest hill. It was a place of forgotten dreams, a relic of a different era, and its isolation made it the perfect setting for a clandestine meeting. The cold night air whipped at her hair, and the city lights below glittered like a scattered tapestry of stars, a silent audience to the drama unfolding above. He was already there, leaning against the metallic railing, silhouetted against the dark sky. He looked less like the pompous campus king and more like a figure from a noir film. The moonlight carved out the sharp lines of his face, leaving his eyes in shadow. He didn't turn as she approached, his posture one of complete, unnerving composure. There was no anger in his stance, no impatience. He simply existed, a quiet force of nature waiting for the inevitable. "You have my drive," he stated, his voice devoid of any emotion, a flat, cold declaration of fact. "And you have no proof," she shot back, the words coming out bolder than she felt. Her hand instinctively went to the flash drive in her pocket. He finally turned, a faint smirk playing on his lips. His eyes, dark and knowing, held hers. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a thick, worn folder. "I don't need proof," he said, holding it up, "because I have your thesis research." A jolt of pure, unadulterated shock shot through Sora. Her stomach bottomed out. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He hadn't just taken something, he had taken everything. He had hacked into her university account, effortlessly bypassing her passwords and firewalls. Her entire thesis draft, the culmination of her academic career, was in his hand. He had not just outsmarted her, he had dismantled her. His smirk widened ever so slightly as he saw the flicker of sheer panic in her eyes. He wasn't just a cold-hearted bully. He was a strategic opponent whose mind moved 10 steps ahead of everyone else's, a fact that both infuriated and, to her utter dismay, fascinated her. "Here's the deal," he continued, his voice a calm and reasonable tone that only made his cruelty more chilling. "We can trade, or I can release your work to the entire department with a few minor adjustments, and then claim it as my own." He let the unspoken threat hang in the air, a sword of Damocles dangling over her future. "It's your choice." His blackmail was brazen, a casual act of power that infuriated her to her very core. Yet, as she stood there, trembling with a mix of fear and rage, she couldn't deny the undeniable pull of curiosity. His motive was no longer just about revenge. It was about a deeper game, a psychological struggle she was only just beginning to comprehend. The hatred had not vanished, but it was now tangled up with a strange, grudging respect for his cunning, and a terrifying fascination with the dangerous man who stood before her. "Here's the deal," he continued, his voice a calm and reasonable tone that only made his cruelty more chilling. "We can trade. Or I can release your work to the entire department with a few minor adjustments, and then claim it as my own." He let the unspoken threat hang in the air, a sword of Damocles dangling over her future. "It's your choice." His blackmail was brazen, a casual act of power that infuriated her to her very core. Yet, as she stood there, trembling with a mix of fear and rage, she couldn't deny the undeniable pull of curiosity. His motive was no longer just about revenge. It was about a deeper game, a psychological struggle she was only just beginning to comprehend. The hatred had not vanished, but it was now tangled up with a strange, grudging respect for his cunning, and a terrifying fascination with the dangerous man who stood before her. Sora had been cornered. There was no other word for it. The observatory on the hill, under the watchful, glittering eyes of the city, had been the stage for his perfect, calculated strike. With her thesis research held hostage, she had no choice but to agree to his terms. She gave a cold, resentful nod, the bitterness of the forced collaboration a sour taste in her mouth. She had expected to have to choose between her work and his demands, but his proposal was something else entirely. "The research grant competition," he had said, his voice flat but a glint in his eye. "It's a major prize, enough to secure both our futures. We'll work on it together." He saw her as an asset, a tool to be used, not just a pawn to be sacrificed. He was looking at her, a scholarship student from a small town, as a partner. "Your passion and my logic," he had said, a slow, confident smile spreading across his face. "We could be unstoppable." She was disgusted by the very idea, a partnership born of coercion. But a part of her, the small, strategic part that had picked up his flash drive, couldn't deny the unsettling truth in his words. She had no choice. She was trapped in his game, and now she would have to play. Their collaboration was a trial by fire. For days, they were locked in the sterile, air-conditioned embrace of the campus library, surrounded by the hushed whispers of other students and the looming presence of overdue books. The air crackled with a silent tension that was more exhausting than any of her part-time jobs. Min-jun was relentless, a micromanager of the highest order. He was meticulous to a fault, demanding precision and perfection in every line of code, every footnote, every citation. He pushed her harder than anyone ever had, his standards impossibly high. She found herself constantly on edge, fighting the urge to lash out, to tell him that his perfect, structured world felt like a cage to her. Yet, as the long hours bled into sleepless nights, a strange new dynamic began to emerge. Sora, through her resentment, began to observe him. She saw not the campus king, but a man under immense, suffocating pressure. She saw him on a late-night phone call, his voice low and tense, not of a man in charge, but a son pleading for validation from an overbearing father. The relentless drive she had once mistaken for pure arrogance was actually a desperate, deep-seated desire to prove himself, to earn the respect that she, ironically, had never had to fight for. She saw the puppet strings attached to the boy everyone saw as a king, and a flicker of compassion, a completely unwelcome and unsettling emotion ignited in her chest. In turn, Min-jun, who had initially seen her as a wild, unpredictable variable, began to see her for what she was, a brilliant, creative problem solver. Her raw intelligence, her ability to think laterally and find unique solutions to problems he had only ever approached with cold logic, started to impress him. He would catch himself watching her, a quiet look of concentration on his face, no longer with disdain, but with a strange, grudging respect. The turning point came on a night when the sky opened up. A sudden, violent downpour trapped them in the library, the drumming of rain against the windows creating a sealed-off, intimate world. They were working on a particularly complex algorithm, a problem that had been a thorn in Sora's side for weeks. She was staring at the screen, her mind a blank, when he leaned in closer. "You're overthinking it," he murmured, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. He pointed to a small line of code she had dismissed, his finger hovering just above the screen. As he made his suggestion, their hands accidentally brushed over the keyboard. A jolt of electricity, sharp and undeniable, ran through them both. It wasn't the fleeting contact of two strangers, it was a connection that felt both profound and terrifying. For a long, silent beat, they were frozen, their gazes locked. The air, once filled with tension, now hummed with a different kind of energy, an undeniable magnetic pull. The hatred, the bitterness, the resentment, all of it seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a confusing, unsettling, and completely undeniable attraction. They were no longer enemies. They were just two people, trapped in a room, and in a moment, that was all that mattered. The air in the lab, which had once crackled with a nervous energy of hope and ambition, was now suffocating. The final presentation was just a day away, and Sora and Min-jun had been meticulously putting the finishing touches on their project. Their fragile truce, born of forced collaboration and a burgeoning, confusing attraction, felt like it was on solid ground for the first time. But that sense of stability was about to be shattered. Sora's phone, which she had silenced hours ago, began to ring with a persistence that was impossible to ignore, a sharp, shrill sound in the otherwise quiet room. She answered, her voice tired and strained. On the other end was an official, yet nervously apologetic, voice from the financial aid office. The conversation was a short, brutal punch to the gut. A clerical error, a simple administrative mistake, had jeopardized her entire scholarship. The numbers didn't add up, and without the grant, the debt was a black hole of impossible figures she couldn't hope to climb out of. Her entire academic career, her future, everything she had fought for, was about to be erased because of a single, careless mistake that wasn't even hers. The phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering softly on the desk. A gasp, a single, broken sob escaped her lips, and then a torrent of tears followed, uncontrollable and raw. She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with the despair she couldn't possibly hide. Min-jun, who had been focused on his screen, looked up. He usually kept his distance, a silent, almost disapproving presence in her world of frantic energy. But today was different. He saw the way she was shaking, the deep, gut-wrenching sobs that tore through her frame. He saw not the fierce, determined student he had come to admire, but a broken, vulnerable girl whose world had just ended. He simply moved his chair, a soft scrape against the floor, and sat beside her. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't try to touch her. He just sat, a still, quiet anchor in her storm. After a few long moments, when her sobs had subsided to a quiet, shaking breath, he spoke, his voice a low, hesitant whisper. "I'm sorry," he said, the words heavy with a genuine emotion she had never heard from him before. "I know this is important to you." He reached for his phone, and a few moments later, he was gone, leaving her alone with her grief. Just as she was about to give in to a fresh wave of despair, a notification appeared on her laptop screen. It was an email, not from the financial aid office, but from the university's dean. The subject line was clear: formal request to resolve scholarship issue. It outlined her situation, acknowledged the clerical error, and stated that the issue would be resolved with immediate effect. It was an official letter, a formal order, signed and stamped. A miracle. But the miracle didn't come from a faceless administrative deity. It came from him. He had used his family's connections and his own power, not to lord it over her, but to quietly, selflessly fix her problem without even being asked. He returned to the lab, his face a carefully constructed mask of his usual cold indifference. But it was too late. Sora had seen through it. A wave of compassion, a torrent that washed away all her anger, all her confusion, all her resentment washed over her. She knew then that his arrogance wasn't a reflection of his true character, but a shield he used to protect a vulnerability he had never been able to show anyone. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, she understood. "The flash drive," she whispered, her voice still trembling. "The emails, the blackmail, why?" He looked away, his facade crumbling. I was trying to stop myself from getting caught staring at you in the library," he confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush of painful honesty. "The public humiliation, it was an accident. I didn't know how to apologize. I just wanted you to look at me, to acknowledge me. The flash drive, I took it on purpose. I thought it would be a way to talk to you again." He confessed to all of it, the clumsy, desperate attempts to get her attention, to find a way to be close to her. His blackmail, his power play, was not an act of control. It was an act of a lonely, desperate boy who had never learned how to express his feelings. It was, in his own strange way, a cry for connection. The final presentation was a resounding success, a triumph that echoed in the hallowed halls of the university. The thunderous applause from the faculty and the impressed nods from the judges were a testament not only to their brilliant work, but to the unlikely, undeniable synergy of their partnership. The prize, a major research grant that secured both their futures, felt less like an achievement and more like a symbol of their shared journey. The journey had been fraught with animosity and deceit, but in the end, it was their combined strength that had carried them to victory. The air was thick with congratulations and praise, but all Sora could feel was Min-jun's quiet presence beside her, the unspoken words of his confession still ringing in her ears. Afterward, they escaped the celebratory crowd, finding refuge on the empty rooftop of the university building. The night wind, cool and cleansing, swirled around them, a stark contrast to the stifling tension that had once defined their interactions. The world below was a tapestry of city lights, but up here, in the quiet isolation, only they existed. It was in this moment, with the weight of the world lifted from their shoulders, that Min-jun finally spoke, his voice low and vulnerable, completely stripped of its usual arrogant facade. "The flash drive," he began, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as if he couldn't bear to look at her. "It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't about the data on it." He confessed that it was a pretext, a clumsy, desperate attempt to talk to her again after his public humiliation of her a year ago. He admitted that he had regretted his words the moment they left his mouth, a fact that had haunted him ever since. He had seen her presentation, not with contempt, but with a deep, unsettling admiration. He was mesmerized by her passion, her fierce determination, and the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her research. It was then that he realized his heart was in a constant state of turmoil, a chaotic storm of emotions he had never learned to navigate. He confessed that he was so used to being the cold campus king, the unapproachable heir to a powerful company, that he had forgotten how to simply be a person. He had lived his life as a mask, a persona of perfection and superiority, a role he played to please his father in the world. But when he met her, he saw something authentic, something real, and it terrified him. It made him want to shed his mask, but he didn't know how. He had been watching her from a distance, lost in a world he was too afraid to enter. He continued, his voice barely a whisper, revealing a secret history she had never known. He had been the one who left her anonymous notes with research suggestions on her desk when she was struggling, the one who gave her hints on her papers that seemed to appear out of nowhere. It wasn't the work of a rival, but the clumsy gifts of an admirer. And then came the most staggering confession of all. He had been the one who had anonymously donated to her college fund last year, a quiet act of kindness that had saved her when she needed it most, and a debt she could never repay. He had done it because he saw her struggle, because he wanted to help her, and because he couldn't bear to let her fall. He had always been there, in the background, a silent, lonely guardian. "The hatred I showed," he confessed, "was a clumsy, misguided attempt to get your attention. It was a front for my deep-seated affection. I was so used to being feared, I didn't know how to be loved." His arrogant persona, the mask of the campus king, was the only armor he had ever known, and she was the first person who had ever seen through it. He had always loved her first, from a distance, in his own strange, convoluted way. The blackmail wasn't about control. It was his last, desperate, chaotic attempt to force her to notice him, to force her into a world where he could finally, truly talk to her. It was his final, terrifying gamble for her affection. The silence on the rooftop was now a space filled with the beautiful, heartbreaking truth of a boy who had to become a villain to finally have a chance to become a hero. The quiet of the rooftop was broken only by the gentle sigh of the night wind. Yet in Sora's mind, a thunderous silence had taken hold. She stood there, completely speechless, as the pieces of the puzzle, all the sharp edges and mismatched fragments of their history, clicked into place with a profound sense of emotional release. The arrogant sneer she had despised was not a symbol of his superiority, but a mask worn by a lonely boy. The coldness she had felt was not disdain, but the fear of a man so burdened by his family's expectations that he had forgotten how to express a single genuine emotion. Her hatred, once so clear and defined, melted away like a snowdrift in the spring sun, replaced by an overwhelming sense of compassion and understanding. All this time, she had seen him as a villain, a ruthless antagonist in her life story. But he wasn't a villain. He was a human being, trapped and struggling, just like her. He had loved her first, in his own strange, convoluted, and tragically misguided way. The blackmail she had despised was not a power play. It was, in the deepest sense, a cry for help from someone who had no other language to use. Her initial hatred had been a shield, a self-protective instinct that had blinded her to his true nature. But now, in the face of his raw vulnerability and the genuine love he had confessed, she couldn't help but feel a profound, soul-deep sense of connection. He had been looking for a way to her all this time, and through the most chaotic and painful means, he had finally found it. The boy who had been a cold king was now just a man, and she, who had once been a pawn in his game, was now his equal, his queen, a partner in a love they had built from the ashes of their conflict. As the last remnants of her past anger dissolved, a quiet understanding settled between them, a bridge built of silent apologies and unspoken forgiveness. Their shared gaze was a long, meaningful conversation, a moment of profound recognition that transcended all the bitterness and betrayal. In that look, he saw not the student he had tormented, but the woman he had loved from afar. And she saw not the campus king she had hated, but the man who had secretly protected her, the boy who had been too afraid to simply reach out. He took a hesitant step toward her, and then another, until he stood before her. With a trembling hand, he reached out and gently took her hand. His touch, soft, warm, and real, a stark and beautiful contrast to the cold campus king she had known. That simple touch was a physical manifestation of his emotional transformation, a promise that the cold, hard walls he had built were finally coming down. The past was not forgotten, but the grudges were erased, replaced by the warmth of a new, unexpected future. Their love story was not a fairy tale born of a perfect meeting. It was a chaotic, beautiful epic, born from a bitter rivalry and a desperate act of blackmail. It was a testament to two souls who, against all odds, found each other through a twist of fate, a series of painful and clumsy events that had ironically led them to the very thing they both secretly yearned for. It was a beautiful, unexpected journey, one that began with hatred and ended with a love that was not only strong enough to overcome the obstacles they had faced, but was forged and tempered by the fire it had endured. It was a beautiful, unexpected journey, one that began with hatred and ended with a love that was not only strong enough to overcome the obstacles they had faced, but was forged and tempered by the fire it had endured.